The year was 1888, and London stood at the very heart of a rapidly industrializing world. The Victorian era was a paradox of progress and poverty. Railways stretched across Britain, new machines fueled factories, and scientific discovery reshaped daily life. Yet, amidst the glittering wealth of the West End, the East End of London groaned under the weight of destitution. Overcrowded housing, rampant unemployment, alcoholism, prostitution, and disease plagued districts like Whitechapel. It was into this environment of desperation and despair that a faceless killer, known only by the chilling moniker Jack the Ripper, emerged, terrorizing London with a series of brutal murders that would shake the world. Whitechapel was one of London's poorest districts. Its maze of narrow alleys, gaslit streets, and dilapidated lodging houses created an environment where crime and anonymity thrived. Tens of thousands of immigrants, particularly Irish laborers and Eastern European Jews fleeing persecution, settled in the East End, intensifying competition for scarce resources. Poverty forced many women into prostitution, and it was among these marginalized women that Jack the Ripper found his victims. The murders, beginning in late August 1888, were not the first crimes to plague the district. Whitechapel was notorious for violence, drunkenness, and occasional killings. But what set the Ripper murders apart was their sheer brutality, their apparent targeting of vulnerable women, and the macabre precision of the mutilations inflicted. These killings felt different. They seemed to carry a deliberate cruelty, and they challenged not only the police but the very sense of security in the heart of the British Empire. From the moment the first body was discovered, the press seized upon the story. London's newspapers were experiencing a boom, and the lurid details of the Whitechapel murders sold papers by the thousands. Public fascination with crime was not new. Victorian readers devoured sensational penny dreadfuls. But Jack the Ripper introduced a new kind of horror, the idea of a serial killer lurking in the shadows, anonymous and unstoppable. The name Jack the Ripper itself came from a letter sent to the Central News Agency, claiming responsibility for the crimes. Whether the letter was genuine or the work of a hoaxer, it stuck. Soon, Jack the Ripper became not just a killer but a legend, a phantom whose crimes blurred the line between reality and myth. Historians and criminologists often debate how many women truly fell victim to Jack the Ripper. While some suggest as many as 11, the generally accepted list is the canonical 5. 5 women murdered between late August and early November of 1888. These killings share enough similarities in method and brutality to be attributed to a single hand, though certainty remains elusive. The first of the canonical victims, Polly Nichols, was discovered in the early hours of August 31st on Bucks Row, today Durward Street. Nichols was a 43-year-old woman who had battled poverty and alcoholism. Like many women in Whitechapel, she occasionally resorted to prostitution to secure lodging for the night. Her body was found lying on the pavement, her throat cut deeply in 2 places, nearly to the spine. Investigators soon realized the attack went beyond simple homicide. Her abdomen had been slashed open, exposing internal organs. Nichols's murder was more than an act of violence. It bore the hallmarks of a calculated brutality that would become the killer's signature. Just over a week later, on Hanbury Street, another woman was found slain. Annie Chapman, 47, was discovered in the backyard of number 29. Like Nichols, she struggled with poverty and illness, her life marked by hardship. Chapman's murder showed escalating savagery. Her throat was cut, her abdomen mutilated, and parts of her internal organs had been removed, in particular, her uterus. The removal suggested either anatomical knowledge or at least an eerie determination to collect body parts. Witnesses reported seeing Chapman with a man earlier that morning, but descriptions were vague. A dark-haired man, shabby in appearance, possibly foreign. This killing heightened the fear gripping London. The sense that the murderer had a purpose, that he might be hunting with some grotesque motive, set the city ablaze with rumors. Known as the double event, September 30th brought 2 murders in a single night. The first victim, Elizabeth Stride, was discovered in Dutfield's yard off Burner Street. Stride, 44, had her throat cut, but bore none of the abdominal mutilations characteristic of the earlier murders. Some investigators believe the Ripper had been interrupted. A witness claimed to have seen Stride with a man just minutes before her death, and the proximity of passers-by may have forced the killer to flee before carrying out his full ritual. Whether Stride was truly a Ripper victim has been debated, but most scholars include her in the canonical list. Less than an hour after Stride's murder, another body was discovered in Mitre Square. Catherine Eddowes, 46, had been brutally mutilated. Her throat slashed, abdomen ripped open, kidney, and part of her womb removed. Her face had also been grotesquely disfigured, with cuts across the cheeks and eyelids. The proximity of the 2 murders suggested a frenzied determination, as if the killer, denied full satisfaction with Stride, sought another victim that very night. The savagery of Eddowes' injuries shocked even hardened police surgeons. Nearby, police found a bloodied piece of her apron discarded in Goulston Street. Above it, scrawled in chalk, was a message: "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." The cryptic graffiti fueled anti-Semitic tensions in Whitechapel, where Jewish immigrants were often scapegoated. Police, fearing riots, quickly erased the writing. To this day, its connection to the killer remains uncertain. The final and most horrific murder, attributed to Jack the Ripper, occurred inside the victim's room. Unlike the previous street killings, Mary Jane Kelly, around 25 years old, lived in Miller's Court, a squalid single-room lodging. Her body was discovered by her landlord's assistant the following morning. The scene was nightmarish. Kelly had been mutilated almost beyond recognition. Her throat was severed to the spine, her abdomen and chest flayed open, and many of her organs removed and placed about the room. Her face was mutilated, with features obliterated. The privacy of the indoor setting had given the killer time, and the result was an atrocity unlike any seen before in London. Kelly's murder marked both the climax of the Ripper's reign of terror and, strangely, its end. After November 1888, the killings attributed to Jack the Ripper ceased. The canonical 5 murders left Whitechapel in a state of near panic. Women feared venturing out after dark. Police patrols doubled, and the press filled columns with speculation. Each murder fed the sense of dread and fascination. The idea that an unknown predator stalked the streets, selecting victims at will and melting back into the fog. The Whitechapel murders unfolded at a time when modern policing was still finding its footing. Scotland Yard's detectives had been in operation for only a few decades, and forensic science was in its infancy. Faced with a series of brutal killings that defied explanation, the Metropolitan Police launched one of the most intensive investigations of the 19th century. And yet, their quarry remained elusive. The responsibility for solving the Whitechapel murders fell primarily to the Metropolitan Police's H Division, based in Whitechapel, under the command of Inspector Edmund Reed. However, the investigation soon drew in higher-ranking officials, including Detective Inspectors Frederick Aberline, Henry Moore, and Walter Andrews, who were dispatched from Scotland Yard. One of the chief difficulties lay in the geography of Whitechapel itself. Its narrow lanes, dark alleys, and overcrowded lodging houses made it nearly impossible to secure crime scenes. Crowds often gathered before police could establish order, contaminating potential evidence. In addition, the murders occurred in public spaces, under the cover of darkness, leaving few reliable witnesses. At a time before fingerprinting, DNA analysis, or even blood typing, investigators relied heavily on eyewitness accounts, confessions, and circumstantial evidence. The Ripper, who left behind no coherent trail beyond his victims, thrived in such an environment. During the height of the murders, the police and newspapers were inundated with letters claiming to be from the killer. Most were dismissed as hoaxes, but a few stood out. The Dear Boss letter, September 18, 1888, sent to the Central News Agency. It was signed Jack the Ripper, a name that immediately entered the public imagination. The writer taunted police, promising further killings. Whether genuine or not, the letter was published, fueling hysteria. The Saucy Jack postcard, October 18, 1888. Arriving shortly after the double event, it seemed to reference the murders of Stride and Eddowes, though details were vague enough to raise suspicion. The From Hell letter, October 1888, delivered to George Lusk of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. This chilling missive came with half of a preserved human kidney, supposedly taken from Catherine Eddowes. Written in a crude hand, it spoke of frying and eating the other half. Some experts believe this letter could be genuine, given the anatomical link, though doubts remain. The flood of correspondence created more confusion than clarity. Sorting genuine communications from hoaxes drained police resources and heightened public panic. The role of the press cannot be overstated. Newspapers sensationalized the murders, publishing grisly details, speculative theories, and lurid illustrations. Reporters flooded Whitechapel, interviewing locals and sometimes interfering with police work. This coverage fueled immense pressure on the Metropolitan Police. The public demanded swift justice, and when none was forthcoming, frustration turned toward the authorities themselves. Accusations of incompetence and corruption plagued Scotland Yard. Some critics even suggested that the police were deliberately covering up the murderer's identity to protect someone powerful. Rumors that would persist in Ripper lore for more than a century. Frustrated by the police response, local businessmen and residents organized their own patrols. The Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, led by George Lusk, offered rewards, conducted night watches, and even hired private detectives. Their efforts, though well-intentioned, often clashed with official investigations. The discovery of the From Hell letter was a direct result of their activities. The presence of these committees reflected the broader mistrust of the authorities. For many in Whitechapel, the police represented a distant, ineffective institution, more concerned with protecting the wealthy than with defending the poor. Even as detectives scoured Whitechapel for leads, rumors spread far beyond the district. Some Londoners whispered that the killer must be a doctor, given the apparent anatomical skill shown in removing organs. Others hinted at aristocratic involvement, spawning theories that implicated members of the royal family, prominent physicians, or artists. Though these suspicions lacked hard evidence, they underscored a key problem in the investigation. With no clear forensic tools and few reliable witnesses, speculation filled the void where certainty should have been. Despite questioning hundreds of suspects, interviewing countless witnesses, and compiling voluminous case files, the police remained at a standstill. The murders ended abruptly after Mary Jane Kelly's death, leaving no opportunity to catch the killer in the act. In the years that followed, officials privately admitted to their failure. Some, like Inspector Aberline, continued to harbor personal theories about the Ripper's identity. but no consensus emerged. For the Metropolitan Police, the case represented a humiliating defeat, one that would haunt Scotland Yard's reputation for decades. The enduring fascination with Jack the Ripper is not only due to the brutality of the crimes, but also the mystery of the killer's identity. For more than a century, investigators, historians, and amateur sleuths have put forward theories naming suspects that range from local butchers to members of the British royal family. While none have been definitively proven, the variety of suspects illustrates how the Ripper has become a canvas for both fact and speculation. One of the simplest and most plausible theories is that Jack the Ripper was an anonymous local man living in or near Whitechapel who blended seamlessly into the slums. His knowledge of the area's dark alleys and lodging houses would have given him an advantage in evading detection. This theory emphasizes the killer's anonymity. He may not have been famous, wealthy, or even particularly remarkable, merely cunning and brutal. A barrister and part-time schoolteacher, Montague John Druitt was named a suspect by Assistant Chief Constable Sir Melville Macnaghten in 1894. Druitt drowned in the Thames in December 1888, shortly after the last canonical murder. His suicide led some to believe he had been the Ripper, ending the murders with his death. However, Druitt had no known ties to Whitechapel, and the evidence against him was largely circumstantial. Perhaps the most persistent suspect in modern discussions, Aaron Kosminski was a Polish-Jewish immigrant living in Whitechapel. He was known to suffer from mental illness and was later committed to an asylum. Some contemporaries identified him as the prime suspect, and in 2014, a controversial DNA analysis claimed to link him to evidence from Catherine Eddowes' shawl. Critics dispute the validity of the DNA study, citing contamination and poor methodology, but Kosminski remains one of the leading candidates. A Russian-born conman and thief, Michael Ostrog, was also listed in Macnaghten's 1894 memorandum. While he was certainly a criminal, there is little evidence tying him directly to the murders. His inclusion reflects the police's desperation to find possible culprits, even if the connections were tenuous. A Polish-born barber who later poisoned 3 of his wives, George Chapman, became a suspect after his conviction in 1903. Inspector Aberline himself believed Chapman might have been the Ripper. His violent tendencies, misogyny, and residence in Whitechapel lent some weight to the theory, though poisoning and mutilation are very different methods of killing. Critics argue that his known crimes do not match the Ripper's brutality. In 1894, newspaper articles identified Thomas Cutbush, a medical student with a history of mental instability, as a possible suspect. Cutbush was institutionalized after stabbing 2 women. His supposed medical knowledge was cited as evidence, though again, direct connections to the Ripper murders were lacking. Dr. Thomas Neil Cream, known as the Lambeth Poisoner, Cream murdered women using strychnine and was executed in 1892. While in prison, he allegedly claimed to be Jack the Ripper. However, prison records indicate he was incarcerated in Illinois during the Ripper murders, making his confession impossible, unless he was lying or boasting falsely. Among the most sensational theories is the claim that Prince Albert Victor, grandson of Queen Victoria, was somehow involved. Conspiracy theorists argued he contracted syphilis, consorted with prostitutes, or became entangled in a cover-up. Others claimed the Ripper killings were orchestrated by Sir William Gull, Queen Victoria's physician, to silence women who knew of the prince's alleged indiscretions. These stories gained traction in the 20th century, fueled by books and films, but lack credible evidence. Historians generally dismiss them as fantastical, though they reveal how the case became entangled with Victorian anxieties about class, monarchy, and morality. In the late 20th century, crime novelist Patricia Cornwell argued that the painter Walter Sickert was Jack the Ripper. She based her claim on analysis of Sickert's paintings, handwriting comparisons with the Ripper letters, and circumstantial links. Most experts, however, consider her evidence weak and speculative. Sickert remains a controversial but unlikely suspect. An Irish-born quack doctor, Tumblety, was arrested in London during the time of the murders on charges of gross indecency. He had a reputation for misogyny and was known to collect specimens of female organs. After being released on bail, he fled to the United States, which some argue explains the abrupt end of the killings. However, no solid evidence links him directly to the Whitechapel murders. A more unconventional suggestion is that the murders were not the work of a single individual at all. Given the differences in wounds, circumstances, and crime scenes, some theorists argue that multiple killers could have been responsible, their crimes later grouped together under the Ripper name. While this theory explains some inconsistencies, it undermines the psychological and thematic coherence of the Ripper narrative, which thrives on the idea of one shadowy figure. What unites all these suspects and theories is a profound lack of certainty. Despite mountains of speculation, no definitive proof has emerged. Each suspect can be both supported and dismantled, depending on interpretation. This ambiguity is precisely why the Ripper case endures. It remains unsolved, inviting endless debate, reinterpretation, and theorizing. Jack the Ripper was not the first murderer in history, nor the last, but his crimes struck Victorian society in a way no other had before. The combination of brutality, mystery, and sensational press coverage turned the murders into a cultural event, one that reshaped how society thought about crime, urban life, and even the very nature of evil. The murders exposed the stark contrasts within London. On one side stood the prosperous West End, theatres, mansions, and the polished image of the British Empire at its height. On the other side was Whitechapel, overcrowded tenements, unpaved streets, and lives defined by poverty. For many upper and middle-class Londoners, the Ripper murders were their first real confrontation with the reality of East End life. The press's lurid depictions of slums, prostitutes, and drunken alleyways served as a shocking revelation. Jack the Ripper, then, became more than a murderer. He symbolized the dangers and moral decay that lurked within the very heart of the empire. The late 19th century was a time of rapid newspaper expansion. The murders coincided with a hunger for sensational news, and the Ripper case provided perfect fodder. For the first time, crime reporting became daily entertainment, with updates, maps, sketches, and serialized theories filling papers across Britain and beyond. This was crime as spectacle. Ordinary people consumed the case like a serialized drama, speculating about suspects and discussing theories in pubs and parlors. The press coverage not only kept the fear alive, but also helped shape the archetype of the modern serial killer. Without newspapers feeding the frenzy, Jack the Ripper might have been remembered as just another East End murderer. The Ripper murders crystallized Victorian fears about the anonymity of urban life. In a sprawling city of millions, a killer could slip through the fog, commit atrocities, and vanish into the crowd. This was a new kind of threat, faceless, random, and seemingly unstoppable. For women in Whitechapel, the fear was immediate and personal. Many avoided going out at night, while others were forced by poverty to continue their trade despite the risks. For the city at large, the Ripper symbolized the dangers of modern urban existence, a reminder that progress and civilization had their shadows. The Ripper murders left a deep imprint on literature, both in the Victorian era and beyond. Sensational penny dreadfuls fictionalized the killings, while serious authors used the case as inspiration for darker explorations of human nature. Robert Louis Stevenson's strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, published in 1886, just before the murders, was quickly associated with the idea of duality and hidden monstrosity that the Ripper seemed to embody. Later, works such as Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes stories reflected society's longing for rational detectives who could make sense of such chaos. Artists and playwrights also found inspiration. Walter Sickert, later accused, wrongly most historians believe, of being the Ripper, produced paintings that some claim echoed the atmosphere of Whitechapel. In the 20th century, the Ripper appeared in films, novels, graphic novels, and even music, his image morphing into a dark, cultural symbol. The unsolved nature of the case created a new subculture, amateur and professional sleuths, dedicated to studying the Whitechapel murders. By the 20th century, Ripperology had become a recognized field, complete with societies, conferences, and an ever-expanding library of theories. Ripperology is more than a hobby. It reflects society's enduring obsession with mystery and evil. The fact that the killer was never caught ensures that new generations return to the case, hoping to solve what Scotland Yard could not. Though the Ripper murders predated forensic innovations like fingerprinting and DNA analysis, they played a role in highlighting the need for better investigative tools. The inability of Victorian police to solve the case revealed the limitations of their methods. In this way, Jack the Ripper indirectly influenced the development of criminology, pathology, and investigative procedure. Modern attempts to apply DNA analysis and psychological profiling to the Ripper case underscore his role as a bridge between old-fashioned detective work and modern forensic science. Jack the Ripper gave rise to an archetype, the faceless, nameless serial killer lurking in the shadows. Unlike killers who were caught and named, the Ripper remained anonymous, making him a blank canvas onto which society projected fears, fantasies, and theories. The Ripper archetype has echoed through countless fictional villains, from Dracula to Hannibal Lecter, and even into modern slasher films. The idea of the unknown predator, striking at random, owes much of its cultural potency to Whitechapel's Phantom Butcher. Though the murders occurred in a few dark alleys of London, their influence was global. Newspapers in America, Europe, and beyond reported on the case, cementing Jack the Ripper as the world's first media serial killer. In the decades since, the name has been invoked in countless contexts, from describing other unsolved killers to appearing in pop culture references worldwide. Jack the Ripper is no longer merely a historical figure. He is a cultural symbol of mystery, violence, and the dark allure of the unsolved. Although the murders occurred more than 130 years ago, Jack the Ripper has never faded into history. Instead, advances in criminology, forensics, and psychology have breathed new life into the investigation. Each generation of researchers brings its own methods and biases, ensuring the case remains one of the world's most studied and debated mysteries. In the mid-20th century, criminologists began to apply psychological profiling to the Ripper murders. Dr. Thomas Bond, a police surgeon in 1888, had already provided a rudimentary profile suggesting the killer was a solitary man of homicidal and erotic mania with no medical training but a deep-seated hatred of women. In the 1980s, FBI profilers revisited the case. They suggested the Ripper was likely a white male in his late 20s to 30s, local to Whitechapel, with deep-seated misogyny and possible psychosexual dysfunction. He may have lived alone or in unstable conditions, blending easily into the environment of lodging houses. This profile reinforced the idea of an ordinary yet monstrous individual hiding in plain sight. The advent of DNA testing in the late 20th century raised hopes of solving the case once and for all. The most famous attempt came in 2014, when researchers claimed to have identified traces of Aaron Kosminski's DNA on a shawl allegedly belonging to Catherine Eddowes. The study received worldwide attention, but also fierce criticism. Experts pointed out that the shawl's provenance was questionable, its chain of custody broken, and contamination likely over the decades. Furthermore, the genetic markers used were not unique enough to prove identity. While intriguing, the Kosminski DNA evidence has not been universally accepted. Still, the attempt demonstrates the allure of applying modern science to historic mysteries. For many, the dream remains that some overlooked item of evidence may one day yield a conclusive genetic link. In the modern era, new suspects and theories continue to emerge, often fueled by books and documentaries. Among them, Walter Sickert, artist. Crime novelist Patricia Cornwell reignited suspicion of Sickert, claiming forensic evidence tied his DNA to Ripper letters. Most historians reject this, but the theory remains popular. James Maybrick, Liverpool cotton merchant. In the 1990s, a supposed diary surfaced, in which Maybrick confessed to being the Ripper. The diary is widely regarded as a hoax, though it still fuels debate. Joseph Barnett, Mary Jane Kelly's lover. Some argue Barnett, enraged by Kelly's lifestyle, killed her, and possibly the others to frighten her away from prostitution. This theory emphasizes personal rather than anonymous motives. Each theory reflects not only historical speculation, but also the cultural climate of the time. Suspects rise and fall in popularity as society projects new concerns onto the old mystery. The internet has given rise to a new wave of Ripperologists. Online forums, digital archives, and crowdsourced research allow enthusiasts worldwide to pore over case files once accessible only to scholars. Digital tools have enabled detailed mapping of the murders, statistical analyses of patterns, and even 3D reconstructions of Victorian Whitechapel. While the democratization of research has expanded interest, it has also multiplied conspiracy theories and pseudoscience. The case thrives in this environment of endless speculation, where definitive answers remain tantalizingly out of reach. Despite modern tools, the Ripper remains unidentified. This unresolved status is part of the fascination. Solved crimes fade into history. Unsolved ones linger, haunting the imagination. The Ripper is not merely a killer, but a mythic figure precisely because he was never caught. The continued failure of science and scholarship to close the case reinforces his enduring grip. Each failed solution renews the mystery, ensuring Jack the Ripper lives on in cultural memory. Though unsolved, the Ripper case profoundly influenced the evolution of criminal investigation. It highlighted the limitations of Victorian policing, spurring calls for reform. Over time, fingerprinting, blood analysis, and crime scene preservation became standard, tools unavailable in 1888. In a sense, Jack the Ripper's victims contributed to progress in law enforcement by exposing the dire need for better techniques. Modern investigations reveal as much about the present as they do about the past. In the Victorian era, theories reflected anxieties about class, immigration, and morality. Today, theories often echo our own concerns: forensic science, criminal psychology, and gender violence. Each retelling adapts the case to the values and fears of its audience, keeping it relevant across centuries. Jack the Ripper's killings lasted barely 3 months in the autumn of 1888, yet their impact has endured for over a century. In the dimly lit alleys of Whitechapel, A handful of murders transcended their immediate horror and became a defining cultural moment. They exposed Victorian London's social divisions, challenged the credibility of its police, and birthed a media spectacle that would shape crime reporting for generations to come. The canonical five, Polly Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, were women marginalized by poverty, addiction, and circumstance. Their tragic deaths highlighted the vulnerability of those living on society's margins, forcing London to confront the grim realities of its underclass. Too often, the killer overshadows the humanity of his victims, yet their stories remain central to understanding the tragedy of the case. Jack the Ripper endures in the cultural imagination because he embodies the unknown. Other serial killers eventually face justice, their faces revealed, and motives probed. The Ripper, however, slipped into the fog and vanished, leaving only questions. His identity remains a void into which generations pour their fears, fantasies, and theories. This lack of resolution is not a flaw, but a feature of the mystery. The unsolved nature of the case ensures its immortality. Each failed attempt to unmask him only deepens the allure. In this way, Jack the Ripper is less a historical criminal and more a cultural archetype, the faceless predator, the embodiment of urban dread. In today's world, the Ripper's legacy continues to resonate. He represents not just the horror of violent crime, but also society's fascination with it. True crime podcasts, documentaries, and dramas owe much to the template first established in 1888, when newspapers turned murder into serialized narrative. At the same time, the case speaks to ongoing issues: violence against women, the failures of institutions to protect the vulnerable, and the dangers of dehumanizing the marginalized. Each retelling offers an opportunity to remember not only the mystery of the killer, but also the lives of the victims who deserve dignity and recognition. The foggy streets of Whitechapel have long since changed. The lodging houses and narrow alleys have been replaced by modern buildings. Yet the shadow of the Ripper lingers. He remains both a real murderer of flesh and blood and a mythic figure of fear, fascination, and enduring mystery. Jack the Ripper was never caught, and perhaps that is why we continue to chase him. In searching for his identity, we are also searching for meaning, trying to make sense of senseless violence, to impose order on chaos, and to confront the darkest aspects of humanity that, even now, remain with us.